Good afternoon. My name is Hollis Thoms, and I'm the composer of the new opera, Transfiguration at Grinder's Stand. It will be premiered June 14th to June 16th by the Dakota Pro under the direction of Dr. Jason Thoms, and it is funded by the Northern Plains National Heritage Area Foundation. The opera that I've written is based on the mysterious death of Captain Meriwether Lewis on October 10th, 1811. And my opera here, you can see here, it comes in 3 volumes. The score is in 3 volumes. There are 6 scenes, and there's also a libretto and an article that I have had published recently on the creation of the opera. And as I explain the opera, I am going to read from my article and then point some things out that I have on here on the table to illustrate what I'm speaking about. My one-act opera, Transfiguration at Grinder's Stand, was written in response to reading the Lewis and Clark journals from their famous expedition of May 1804 to September 1806, and in reading about the mysterious death of Meriwether Lewis only a few years later on October 10th, 1811. I made a trip to Bismarck, North Dakota, visiting Fort Mandan, a Lewis and Clark stopping point, and also traveled to Grinder's Stand, about 70 miles southwest of Nashville, Tennessee, where Lewis unexpectedly died at the age of 35. These trips helped me to imagine what happened over 200 years ago. Captain Meriwether Lewis, and you can see him here, Captain Meriwether Lewis, 1774 to 1811, the famed leader of the Lewis and Clark expedition, died mysteriously by 2 gunshot wounds on October 10, 1811, at a cabin near Grinder's Stand off Natchez Trace. His controversial death has sparked many articles and books over the years on whether he died by suicide or murder. And here are a number of the books that I've read on this. My opera musically dramatizes this controversy in an hour-long work for 3 singers and small chamber ensemble of alto flute, violin, oboe, bass clarinet, bassoon, and double bass. The 3 characters in the opera are Meriwether Lewis, baritone, John Pernier, tenor, Lewis's African-American servant, and Priscilla Grinder, soprano, wife of the landlord of Grinder's Stand. The setting is at the cabin at Grinder's Stand, where Lewis spent the evening of October 10th on his trip from St. Louis, where he was governor of Upper Louisiana Territory, to Washington, D.C. He was going to meet with members of the new James Madison administration to clear up some financial problems and clear his name from perceived scandals. Lewis carried his famous journals with him on this journey back to Washington. After Jefferson negotiated Louisiana Purchase, and here's a picture of Jefferson. After Jefferson, our 3rd president, negotiated the Louisiana Purchase, he assigned Captain Lewis, who had been his personal secretary, to be in charge of leading the famous military expedition to explore the possibility of a water route up the Missouri River to the Pacific Ocean, opening up the vast frontier to American citizens and ideally providing an interchange of commerce between the Native Americans and the American settlers moving west. The journals of Lewis and Clark are a literary achievement about a historic expedition. And here are the 3 volumes of the famous Biddle edition of 1814. President Jefferson had an expansive vision for America, and under the influence of the Enlightenment, he sought exhaustive, comprehensive account by Lewis and his group of everything they saw and encountered, including the myriad of Native American tribes, Jefferson instructed that Lewis's valuable journals should be published and made available to the world. As a reward after the expedition, Jefferson appointed Lewis to be the second governor of the Upper Louisiana Territory, although that kept Lewis from editing and publishing his journals, which frustrated Lewis. Lewis was intellectually brilliant, but psychologically sensitive. The expedition offered Lewis an opportunity to display his precise military leadership skills. However, as governor of a new and wild territory, he seemed unable to cope with the unsettling political intrigues and social upheavals in the new wild landscape. He appeared to have a breakdown as he made his trip from St. Louis to Washington in 1811, and he tried to commit suicide a number of times before getting to Grinder's Stand, the setting of my opera. During the famous expedition, there were many encounters with Native Americans, and those interactions were at times very dangerous. However, there were times when one of his members of the expedition would play his fiddle and dance, and the Native Americans would share their music and dance, and they would both dance to each other's music, an act of some mutual empathy and understanding. In my opera, I have the alto flute play some Native American tunes in combination with and in counterpoint against the violin and distinctly European 18th century musical tunes. In the sung dialogues, I try to articulate the various theories given by scholars of Lewis's disintegration and depression. Suffering from malaria, syphilis, alcoholism, drug addiction, and bipolar depression. I presented some of the theories about his possible murder and suicide. Simple murder by thieves on the dangerous Natchez Trace route. Death by conspirators to avoid Lewis exposing the corruption going on in Louisiana Territory. Murder by Priscilla's Grinder's husband returning from his trip away to possibly finding his wife in bed with Lewis. Killing himself to relieve the pain caused by one of his illnesses, or because he was depressed by his life's condition, including financial woes and lack of female companionship. I present all these possibilities in my opera, and I add my own theory for his death. Lewis, realizing that his journals, when published, would open up the vast West to the uncontrolled migration of American citizens and unleash on Native Americans an invasion that would not be able to be overcome, kills himself. He began to see himself as a biblical serpent in Eden, destroying the Native American civilization. In the last scene of my opera, Lewis attempts to burn his journals and then kills himself out of despair. To provide evidence to support my theory, I exhibit that Captain Meriwether Lewis commissioned a portrait of himself in 1807, a year after the end of the expedition, wearing the Native American regalia given to him during his expedition by an Indian chief to help Lewis camouflage himself against other hostile Indian tribes. And here is a picture of this very significant portrait that Lewis had done of himself that you can see here, where he is in the Indian regalia. This was given to him by one of the chiefs, and he had his portrait 1807, a few years after the expedition. This is how he viewed himself. A transformation had taken place, and in a sense, a transfiguration of Lewis's whole attitude about what was happening as a result of his trip. My opera isn't my attempt to mourn. My opera isn't my attempt to mourn what happened to the Native American culture as a result of the European invasion. The Europeans believed in the divine right of discovery, to take for our own selves all that we discover, would annihilate the civilization of the Native Americans who were here before we came and whose lands we took and whose history, thought, culture, and music we attempted to end by our taking. My opera, Transfiguration at Grinder's Stand, is an attempt to realize what happened, and maybe these were indeed the thoughts of Captain Meriwether Lewis on the night of his mysterious death.